We are recording. Okay, here we go. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. You know, Oliver Cowdery has been often quoted as referring to the relationship between Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger as a dirty, nasty, filthy affair. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about whether Oliver Cowdery really wrote that or said that. It could be that it was written by someone else. In our next conversation with historian Don Bradley, we're going to talk more about this letter that Oliver supposedly wrote, and Don thinks that Oliver didn't actually say all of those words. So it's going to be a very fun conversation. You won't want to miss it. Hey, I also want to mention that, we're proud members of the Dialogue Podcast Network. You know who else is a member is the Mormon News Report. So Mormon News Report covers the week in Mormon news with a healthy dose of snark and commentary. Join Brant and Jenny every Monday to get caught up on all the top stories you need to stay up to date on all the top stories in Mormon news. So check out Mormon News Report. You know, Brant and Jenny are great friends of me here at Gospel Tangents, and they're awesome. So check them out. Now back to our conversation. Well, because I know that Oliver Cowdery was essentially excommunicated over this. Yeah. And you've made a discovery, because it's often been quoted as a dirty, nasty, filthy affair.
Yeah.
But you say that word was crossed out, or tell us about that word.
Yeah, so there are letter books that contain, where a copy of a letter would be kept in this letter book. So you'd send a letter off to someone else, but then you would preserve a copy of it yourself. The letter wouldn't be lost to you. So Oliver Cowdery had letter books that are at the Huntington Library out in California. That's a place I wasn't able to get out to in my research. So I asked my friend Chris Smith to go check it out for me. And the reason is this: the Church Archives has a microfilm of that source. And this source is very widely cited, right? Because it uses the word affair. Here you've got Oliver Cowdery right around the time he's excommunicated, writing to his brother, saying, something about Joseph's dirty, nasty, filthy affair with Fanny Alger. And so people are like, well, there you go. Oliver Cowdery at the time thought that it was adultery, so why would we think it was polygamy? What I noticed when I looked at the Church Archives microfilm is that there was something funny. The word affair was written over top of another word. And I was like, what is that word? Because this seems to be a key, right? Like, if Oliver originally wrote some other word, and then affair is written over it, you have to understand the letter book was not written by Oliver. So Oliver wrote the original letter to his brother. Then Oliver's nephew took that original letter, copied it into the letter book for Oliver, and the change is made in the handwriting of Oliver's nephew. So the nephew is changing what Oliver said to something else. So the word affair isn't Oliver's word. Oliver's original word is underneath that word, and I had to know what it was, because everybody for decades has cited this. Like, here you go, we've got the goods, it was an affair. Right? So I could read some of the letters, but I wanted to be really sure. I had Chris go look at it, and he was able to read most of the word. Then we were able to get detailed images from the Huntington Library that Brain Hills has reproduced that show definitively what the word was. The original word is not affair. The word is scrape. S-C-R-A-P-E, scrape. So if you look at what these words meant at the time, you can actually figure out what Oliver was originally saying and why his nephew changed it. So scrape, according to the 1828 Webster's, so just 10 years before Oliver's letter, was a perplexity, a distress. It's like a way of saying somebody got into a jam. They were in a scrape, right? And so he's talking about Oliver and Fanny Alger having got themselves into this jam and they need to get out of it. However, Webster indicates that this is, in his words, a low word. So this is actually not a really polite word. It's sort of like slang. And so Oliver's nephew writes what Oliver had originally said, and then he's like, I'm not going to leave this slang in there. This is not a great way to speak, to preserve this history. So he just finds another word to write over it. He writes the word affair. We look at the word affair, and that word like triggers all kinds of meanings for us.
We think sex.
Right? We think sex, okay? I'd invite listeners to like explore this for yourself. Go on to Google Books or some other database of 19th century texts and look at all the uses you can find of the word affair around this time, okay, early to mid 19th century, and then look at later uses like late 19th century, 20th century, okay. The connotation of a romantic affair from just the word affair does not appear until around the end of the 19th century. And it doesn't come to mean like pretty much talking about people having sex, right, outside of marriage until even later than that. The word affair actually at the time is a very general word rather than a very specific word. So Webster, I'm trying to remember his wording there, but Webster defines affair, and he actually says a word of very broad, a word of very general and indefinite signification. It's just a really super broad word. Basically, as Webster defines it, the word just means anything that people do. Like it's like using the word thing, right? Joseph and Fanny Alger had this dirty, nasty, filthy thing, right? Like there's something that happened. Now, Oliver's pretty clear that it's dirty, nasty, and filthy, right? He's very much against it. However, if you look at Oliver Cowdery's known views on polygamy, he's against it. He doesn't think it's a clean thing. He thinks it's a filthy thing. And so there's nothing in Oliver's wording that would preclude him referring to polygamy there, just referring to it in a very negative way. He says,
he would
Joseph
normally
and Fanny,
think it was negative no matter what.
Yeah. Joseph and Fanny had a dirty, nasty, filthy scrape. Or, they had a dirty, nasty, filthy thing going on between them. What was that thing? Sure, maybe it's adultery here, or maybe it's, illicit polygamy, as far as Oliver's concerned.
So Oliver wouldn't have made the distinction between polygamy and adultery? Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. So we know that even when Oliver returns to the church in the late 1840s, people are telling him about polygamy, and he's having a hard time believing it. He says, I can't imagine, this shows a little naivety here when you hear this, okay, but he says, I can't imagine that Brigham would condone such a thing. Right?
So are you saying that, okay, so it sounds like Eliza believed that the relationship with Fanny and Joseph was a marriage.
Yes.
And it should be noted that Eliza was later married to Joseph,
yes,
polygamously.
Yes.
Oliver would have rejected polygamy outright. And so if Fanny was pregnant, Oliver would have found that a bad thing, and would have rejected that.
Yeah.
Whether it was an affair or whether it was polygamy, Oliver didn't really care what the difference was.
Right. So Oliver's labeling of Joseph and Fanny's relationship as dirty, nasty, filthy doesn't tell us what kind of dirty, nasty, filthy relationship he had in mind. There's every reason to think that to him, polygamy was dirty, nasty, filthy, just like adultery or fornication would have been. So there's, further evidence on this, and I published this in a volume, The Persistence of Polygamy, Volume 1, about Joseph Smith's polygamy. There's actually evidence from the High Council trial minutes where Oliver Cowdery, in absentia, was put on trial by the Far West High Council, that Joseph confessed polygamy to the High Council with Fanny. Because what the sources do show is that Joseph talks to the High Council about his relationship with Fanny Alger. Like, that's in the minutes. The minutes say that. Okay? They don't record the details, but they say that he gave a full history of the girl business with Fanny Alger. Okay? He doesn't deny that there was girl business. And business here, by the way, would be like a similar use of a word to like what affair would have meant at the time. It's just sort of a general word, meaning something happened, right? He gave a full history of the girl business. So the person who took those High Council notes, Ebenezer Robinson, later writes in 1844 something for the Gentile newspapers where he talks about polygamy having reared its head in 1838. He's probably referring to Joseph's confession to the High Council of a polygamous relationship with Fanny Alger. Something that didn't make it into that chapter, because I was making the corrections a little late, is to note that Fanny Alger had an uncle, Solomon Hancock, who was on that High Council. So Oliver Cowdery was found guilty by the High Council of false insinuations against Joseph. Why would the High Council have... why would Fanny's own uncle have found Oliver Cowdery guilty of false insinuations?
Well, let me ask it this way.
Sure.
So, you're saying, because I know Richard Bushman talks about this,
Yeah.
and in Joseph's mind, he wasn't committing adultery because it was a legit marriage.
Yeah.
But in Oliver Cowdery's mind, there was nothing legitimate about this at all. And so,
Right.
but what I'm confused about then is, did the High Council review this as a legitimate marriage?
I don't think the High Council would necessarily have accepted it as a legitimate marriage, because I don't think that Joseph was making a case to the High Council for the legitimacy of polygamy. I think he was trying to distinguish to the High Council that this was not adultery. It may be that to Oliver Cowdery, polygamy and adultery would have been kind of, well, like, what's the diff, right?
Right.
Like, but to Joseph, there definitely was a difference. And I think it's a distinction he would have wanted to make to the High Council. Fanny Alger's uncle, Solomon Hancock, was on that High Council that sided with Joseph over this, rather than siding with Oliver, even though Joseph confesses the relationship. So if her uncle knows Joseph, or thinks Joseph is just taking advantage of Fanny Alger in an adulterous affair, why is he going to side with the guy who took advantage of his niece over Oliver Cowdery? So Joseph tells the High Council things that satisfy them that he has not committed adultery.
What do we think that they think happened?
The High Council thinks
was
happened?
this pregnancy known to them?
The meeting minutes don't show, the High Council minutes for Oliver's trial don't show that the pregnancy was discussed there. However, those notes are very fragmentary. They don't actually tell us what Joseph says. They just tell us that Joseph gave a full history of the girl business and didn't deny the relationship. Her uncle, Solomon Hancock, who was on the High Council, would have known. This is the brother of her Fanny's mother. He would have known, and part of how we know he would have known is that his other brother, Levi Hancock, was the one that Joseph turned to after Emma discovered the relationship and told him, please get Fanny out of town because of the pregnancy. Fanny Alger while Levi Hancock is trying to arrange to get her out of state, actually to get her to Missouri is the original plan. She never makes it that far. She stops in Indiana and just stays there. But while Levi Hancock is planning to get her to Missouri, she's living directly across the street from the Hancocks with another family. And that family is the family that tells us about her pregnancy. So there's no way that the Hancocks don't know about the pregnancy. First of all, Joseph almost certainly confided it in Levi Hancock. Levi Hancock probably knew it anyway already because this is his niece. She's going to be showing, reportedly she's showing already when Emma discovers the relationship and kicks her out. But if not, she's going to be showing pretty soon. It takes her in a little while to get out of town. And so she's going to be increasingly showing, and she's next door neighbors to her uncle. He's going to know. And this all happens way before, and that's like 2 years before the High Council trial. So yeah, they knew. The family knew that Fanny was pregnant.
Okay. But we're not clear. Well, so Joseph said something to satisfy the High Council, but we don't know what the High Council thought about this relationship.
I think we have reason to believe that the High Council concluded that it was not adultery. But I don't know how much or how little they would have approved of Joseph practicing polygamy.
Because this is what year again?
Approximately 1838?
That's early 1838, yeah.
Okay. So, that's interesting. So, and of course the pregnancy, she never had a baby, right? So we don't know that she was pregnant, or she could have miscarried, or...
Oh, there's a later letter from the... So do you remember Brigham Young's wife who goes apostate, Anna Liza?
Was she number 19?
Yeah, yeah, the 19th wife.
Yeah.
So Anna Liza's mother and father are the family that Fanny Alger is sent to stay with, the next door neighbors to the Hancocks. When Anna Liza's mother is writing a letter about this incident years later, she says that Joseph didn't have any children by his polygamous women who lived. So the family indicates that Fanny was pregnant, but then in this letter, the suggestion is that the child did not live. It's not clear, however, at what point the child died. It's not clear whether the child was miscarried, whether the child was stillborn, or whether the child died very young. It's one of those three things, apparently, but we don't actually know which one. There was a pregnancy. There may very well have been an actual birth. There's reason to believe that Fanny Alger was still pregnant a couple months after this in, I think it was around September 1836, when she's traveling west. When the Hancocks are taking her out toward Missouri, they stop in Dublin, Indiana, which was a way station that the Saints often used in their travels to the west. And she stops there and she marries a local guy and just spends the rest of her life there. She marries Solomon Custer, a non-Mormon. Why does she marry like that? Well, I can tell you why she marries like that. She's pregnant and she wants her baby to be legitimate. The sooner she can get herself married, she can get herself married before that child is born. Her child is legitimate, right, in the eyes of the world, even though actually the father, her husband's not the father of the child. So that gives reason to think that she's still pregnant at that point. And most miscarriages happen in the first trimester. So I actually doubt that the child was miscarried. And she's going to have been showing apparently since July. She appears to still be pregnant in September. My guess is that the child dies very early, maybe shortly after birth, or, infant mortality was so high then. There's even the very slight possibility, I doubt this heavily, there's even the very slight possibility that the child was born and then they sort of adopt the child out into some other family. When Fanny Alger later answers census takers' questions about her number of children that she'd had, she appears to omit this child. So that could point to just they adopted the child out, but it's really not clear. There are mysteries solved here, and there are a lot of mysteries yet to be solved. But as you can tell, I am an optimist about what mysteries we can solve. You have to be a crazy optimist to try to figure out exactly when Emma kicked Fanny Alger out of the house and whether she was pregnant and all these things, and to try to figure out what was in the last 116 pages of the Book of Mormon. In fact,
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Don Bradley. In our next conversation, we're going to finally jump into his book, The Lost 116 Pages. In this book, I found out there are some really interesting things that will help us to understand our current Book of Mormon.
A good part of the point of the book really is to just illuminate the Book of Mormon text that we have. We delve into the mystery of what we don't have, and that illuminates what we do.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com, and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.